You've taken us as far as you can, Michael. We need someone with a fresh perspective on modern security infrastructure. Those words still echo in my head. After 20 years of building Westridge Technologies security systems from scratch, I was being shown the door by a CEO who couldn't tell a firewall from a fire drill. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Michael Anderson. I'm 58 years old, and until last month I was the IT Systems Director at Westridge Technologies in Portland. When I joined Westridge in 2004, we were a scrappy startup with 12 employees working out of a converted warehouse in the industrial district. We built custom database solutions for local businesses, and our server room was basically a closet with a desk fan. Now we're a publicly traded company with over 500 employees across 3 office buildings, providing enterprise software solutions to Fortune 500 companies. I built our security infrastructure from the ground up. Every firewall, every authentication protocol, every disaster recovery system, that was my life's work. Then Gregory Pearson happened. Brought in by the board 4 months ago to modernize our approach to market. He swept through our offices like a hurricane, spouting buzzwords about digital transformation and security paradigm shifts that meant nothing to those of us who actually kept the systems running. I knew my days were numbered when he started bringing his son Nathan to executive meetings. Nathan Pearson, 32 years old, with his designer hoodies and limited edition sneakers. Stanford computer science degree, but couldn't troubleshoot his way out of a paper bag. I once overheard him explaining to our engineering team that we should blockchain our firewalls for quantum resistance. Pure nonsense. We're bringing in Nathan to head up a new digital security division, Gregory told me yesterday, leaning against my desk with that practice casual posture they teach in executive coaching. He'll be taking over your department, but we'd like you to stay on in an advisory capacity during the transition. An advisory capacity, I repeated, keeping my voice steady. You mean training my replacement? Gregory had the decency to look uncomfortable. The board feels we need someone who can speak the language of next-gen security. Nathan's presentation on zero trust architecture really impressed them. I nodded once, my face betraying nothing. 20 years of handling security breaches and system failures had given me a poker face that would make Vegas pros jealous. When does this transition begin? Monday, he replied, checking his watch as if he had somewhere more important to be. We'll announce it at the all-hands meeting. 2 weeks of knowledge transfer should be sufficient, don't you think? 2 weeks. 20 years of institutional knowledge, complex systems architecture and security protocols, and they wanted me to download it all to Nathan in 10 business days. But I just nodded again. I'll prepare a transition document. That night, as I sat in my home office staring at the Seattle skyline from my modest Bellevue apartment, I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. Not just in Gregory's decision, but in myself for believing that loyalty and competence would always be valued over nepotism and flashy presentations. I opened my laptop and began typing up my transition notes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was documenting how to manage systems that I had built, that had my fingerprints embedded in every line of code and configuration file. Systems that had kept Westridge's data secure through 3 major ransomware epidemics, countless phishing attempts, and one very determined attack from a state-sponsored hacking group. What Gregory and Nathan didn't realize, what they hadn't bothered to ask, was that I had built in contingencies for everything, including my own unexpected departure. At Westridge, we'd experienced rapid growth, which meant our systems were a patchwork of old and new technologies. I'd created numerous backdoor admin accounts for emergency scenarios, all properly documented in our security protocols that nobody but my team ever read. One of these accounts, designated for disaster recovery, had privileges that circumvented normal authentication channels. It was designed to be used if our primary systems were compromised. I didn't plan to use it for anything nefarious. I just forgot to mention it in my transition notes. An oversight, really. After all, they only gave me 2 weeks. I started at Westridge when cloud computing was still called Application Service Provision. Back then, our biggest client was a local credit union that needed a secure database system for their transition to digital banking. Their IT director, an old-school mainframe guy named Tom, taught me the most important lesson of my career. Security isn't just about having the right systems. It's about understanding human nature. Tom had been right. Over 2 decades, I'd watched countless employees click on phishing links, use password Noti 3 despite all warnings, and plug unknown USB drives into company computers. I'd built our security systems not just to repel outside attackers, but to protect users from themselves. My team grew from just me to a department of 18 dedicated professionals. Sarah Chen joined 11 years ago as a junior network administrator, fresh out of college. Now she managed our entire cloud security infrastructure. James Rodriguez started as our help desk technician and grew into our threat intelligence specialist. Diane Kim, our ethical hacking expert, could find vulnerabilities that even specialized scanning tools missed. We were a family. We celebrated birthdays with cheap sheet cake in the conference room. We pulled all-nighters during system upgrades, fueled by pizza and energy drinks. We had inside jokes about particularly clueless executives who thought the cloud was actually in the sky. When I cleared out my office that Friday afternoon, my team threw an impromptu going-away gathering. Most of the executive floor was at some strategic planning retreat, so we had the place to ourselves. Sarah handed me a card signed by everyone. "We encoded a message in it," she said with a small smile, "just to see if you've still got it." I examined the signatures and immediately spotted the pattern. The first letter of everyone's message spelled out, "Watch your back." A warning. "Nathan's been asking questions," James whispered as he helped me box up my collection of vintage network hardware. "About access levels, authentication overrides, things he shouldn't need to know right away." Diane was more blunt during our awkward elevator ride down. "He's planning to clean house, already talking about bringing in his Stanford buddies. Says we're too legacy-oriented." She made air quotes with her fingers, her expression disgusted. "Take care of each other," I told them as we reached the lobby. "Document everything." That weekend, I could have applied to any number of companies. I'd turned down offers from Microsoft and Amazon over the years, preferring to stay with the company I helped build. My resume would still open doors, but something kept me from hitting submit on those applications. A nagging feeling that I was leaving Westridge vulnerable, not to outside threats, but to threats from within. Monday morning, I watched the all-hands meeting via the company live stream. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Gregory stood on stage in the auditorium, arm around Nathan's shoulders, talking about exciting new directions and modernizing our security approach. The camera panned to my former team. Their faces were carefully neutral, but I could read the tension in their postures. I received my first text from Sarah that afternoon. "He's requesting full access to the Sentinel system. Says he needs to audit the architecture." I stalled him. Sentinel was our proprietary security monitoring platform. I'd designed it to aggregate data from all our security tools, providing a comprehensive overview of our threat landscape. It also contained detailed information about every user account, permission level, and access point in our systems. "Good," I texted back. "Tell him you need authorized admin credentials to grant that level of access." Her response came quickly. "Already did. He's going to his father." Of course he was. That night, I received an email from Westridge's HR director, Marcus Wilson. Marcus had been with the company almost as long as I had. We weren't friends, exactly, but we respected each other. Michael, I need to inform you that your company accounts have been deactivated as part of standard offboarding procedures. If you require access to any personal files, please submit a formal request through the HR portal. Additionally, I wanted to make you aware that all employees from your former department have been placed under a special performance review period. This is standard procedure during leadership transitions. Regards, Marcus. The message was clear. They were watching my team, looking for any sign of resistance to the new regime, but Marcus had included a personal phone number at the end of his email signature, something he'd never done before. An invitation. I called him the next morning, from a coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment. "I can't talk long," Marcus said, his voice low. "But you should know that Nathan has been pushing for elevated system access that goes beyond his role. He's been citing security audit requirements, but I've seen no documentation for such an audit. Has he fired anyone from my team yet?" I asked. "Not yet, but he's brought in 2 consultants from his previous company. They've been given temporary admin credentials." Marcus paused. "Michael, there's something else. Some of the board members have been asking questions about our client data handling practices." "Which clients?" "Large financial institutions, healthcare companies, the ones with the strictest data privacy requirements." My stomach tightened. Westridge handled sensitive data for companies across multiple regulated industries. We'd built our reputation on security and compliance. "Thanks for letting me know," I said. "I didn't call you," Marcus replied before hanging up. That afternoon, I decided to check something. From my home computer, I attempted to log into one of our test development environments using standard employee credentials. As expected, access denied. Then I tried my emergency disaster recovery account, the one I'd forgotten to document in my transition notes. I held my breath as the authentication screen processed my request. A moment later, I was in. They hadn't found it. Of course they hadn't. It wasn't in any of the standard admin directories. I'd created it years ago during a particularly nasty ransomware scare, embedding it deep within our backup restoration protocols. It had elevated privileges because it needed to rebuild systems from scratch in a worst-case scenario. I didn't do anything malicious. I just looked around. Most systems appeared normal, but when I checked the security log archives, I noticed something concerning. Several large data export operations had been initiated over the weekend, exports of client databases that would normally require security review and approval. The user who had authorized these exports, Nathan Pearson. I took screenshots, documenting everything carefully, then logged out. I wasn't ready to draw conclusions yet, but the pattern was troubling. The next day, Sarah called me from what sounded like a bathroom stall. "They're copying client data," she whispered urgently. "Nathan told us it's for a backup verification test, but they're sending it to servers I don't recognize. When I asked about client consent documentation, he told me it was executive level and not to worry about it." "Did you document the transfers?" I asked. "Of course, but they've revoked our access to the security logs." Her voice cracked slightly. "Michael, I think they're going to sell the data. One of Nathan's friends let it slip that they're launching a data analytics consulting service next month. If true, this wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. Our client contracts explicitly prohibited using their data for any purpose other than providing our contracted services. Several of these clients were subject to regulations like HIPAA and GLBA, with strict data protection requirements. "Don't confront them directly," I advised. "Act confused, not suspicious. I need time to figure this out." "Half the team is already interviewing elsewhere," she said. "Nathan's making our lives hell, questioning everything we do. James got written up for insubordination when he asked for documentation on a security protocol change. After we hung up, I spent the evening weighing my options. I could go directly to the board, but without concrete proof, it would be my word against the CEO's son. I could contact clients directly, but that might violate my own confidentiality. Agreements with Westridge. Then I remembered Olivia Thompson. She was a relatively new board member who had previously served as the CISO of a major bank. Unlike most of the board, she actually understood cybersecurity and data compliance issues. We'd spoken a few times at company events, and she'd always asked thoughtful questions about our security practices. I found her email address in an old meeting invitation and composed a careful message. "Miss Thompson, I hope this finds you well. We met several times during my tenure as IT Systems Director at Westridge. I'm reaching out because I've become aware of some data handling practices that may expose the company to significant compliance risks. I'd appreciate a confidential conversation. At your convenience. Regards, Michael Anderson." To my surprise, she responded within an hour, suggesting we meet for coffee the following morning. The cafe she chose was in a quiet part of town, away from the tech corridor where we might be recognized. Olivia arrived precisely on time, dressed in a conservative business suit rather than the casual tech executive attire that had become standard at Westridge. "I appreciate your discretion," she said after ordering a simple black coffee. "Now tell me what's concerning you." I laid out what I knew. The unusual data exports, the lack of client consent documentation, Nathan's background, and the rumors about a new data analytics venture. I was careful to present facts rather than accusations. Olivia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a small pad. When I finished, she sat back and studied me. "You realize this could be interpreted as the complaints of a disgruntled former employee," she said, her tone neutral. "I do. That's why I haven't taken this to regulators or clients yet. But I've spent 20 years protecting Westridge's systems and reputation. I'm not going to watch that be destroyed by someone who doesn't understand or care about our obligations to clients." She nodded slowly. "What evidence do you have of these transfers?" "Screenshots of the security logs. I can provide those. And I believe my former team members would confirm what they've observed, though they're understandably concerned about retaliation." "You still have access to our systems?" Her eyebrow raised slightly. I hesitated, then decided honesty was my best approach. An emergency disaster recovery account that was overlooked during my offboarding. I've only used it to verify what I was hearing from current employees. Instead of being alarmed, Olivia seemed almost impressed. "Gregory assured the board that the transition would be seamless because you'd documented everything so thoroughly." A small smile played at her lips. "I suppose not quite everything." "It would have been in the disaster recovery documentation, page 234 if I recall correctly, which no one ever reads." Now she did smile. "Michael, this is serious. If what you're suggesting is happening, Westridge could face not just regulatory penalties, but a complete loss of client trust. I need time to look into this discreetly." "I understand. What would be helpful?" "Continue documenting anything you observe. Encourage your former team to follow all proper protocols and document any instructions that seem improper. Don't confront Nathan or Gregory directly." She paused. "And be prepared for this to get unpleasant. If they are doing what you suspect, they won't go down without a fight." As we parted ways, Olivia held my gaze. 20 years of service should count for something. I'm sorry it hasn't. Over the next week, I maintained a low profile while gathering information. Sarah and a few trusted team members kept me updated on Nathan's activities. They reported that large data transfers were continuing, now focused on our financial service clients. Nathan had also begun removing security protocols that prevented bulk data exports without secondary verification. Then James was fired. According to Sarah, he'd been escorted out after questioning a direct order to disable a security alert that triggered when sensitive data left our secure servers. His replacement was one of Nathan's Stanford classmates. The following day, I received an unexpected email from Marcus in HR. This is to inform you that Westridge Technologies has initiated a review of all system access during your tenure. We have reason to believe unauthorized access channels may exist. This is a courtesy notice that we will be pursuing all legal remedies if such access is discovered and has been utilized following your departure. Additionally, all severance benefits are under review pending the outcome of this investigation. They were getting nervous. Good. That night I made a final visit to our systems using my disaster recovery account. As I suspected, they were systematically dismantling the security architecture I'd built, replacing it with streamlined but far less robust solutions that prioritized ease of data export over protection. I captured everything, downloading security, logs, access records, and transfer histories to an encrypted drive. As I prepared to log out for the last time, I noticed something alarming. Nathan had scheduled a massive data transfer for the coming weekend, a complete export of our healthcare client database, including protected patient information from several major hospital systems. The destination was an external server registered to a company I didn't recognize, Pearson Analytics Group, LLC. There it was, the smoking gun. A newly formed company, clearly controlled by the Pearsons, set to receive protected healthcare data without client authorization. This wasn't just a regulatory violation, it was potentially criminal. I took screenshots of everything, then made one final move before logging out. I didn't sabotage anything or delete files. I simply reset the disaster recovery protocols to their default settings, which would trigger an automatic security audit if certain types of mass data transfers were attempted. It wasn't a kill switch. It was a tripwire. The next morning, I sent a detailed package to Olivia Thompson containing everything I'd collected. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, Sarah called in a panic. "They're here," she said, her voice hushed. "Federal agents. They've shut down the executive floor and people are saying they're seizing servers and documents." "Are you all right?" I asked, concerned for my former team. "We're being interviewed one by one. They're asking about data transfers and security protocols." "Michael, what did you do?" "I didn't contact any authorities," I said truthfully. "Just documented what I saw." The news broke that evening. The headline in the Seattle Times read, "Tech firm Westridge under investigation for data privacy violations." According to the article, the investigation had been triggered by a board member who had discovered potential HIPAA violations during a routine compliance review. Olivia had moved quickly. Over the next week, the story unfolded across industry publications and local news. Gregory and Nathan Pearson had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Several board members had resigned, including those who had been most vocal about bringing Gregory in as CEO. Federal agents had seized evidence of unauthorized data transfers intended for a new company the Pearsons had formed to monetize client data without consent. I received a call from an interim executive team member asking if I would consider returning to help stabilize the company's security systems. I declined politely. "My time at Westridge is done," I told them, "but I can recommend several excellent candidates from my former team." 2 months later, I sat on the deck of my new cabin near Mount Hood, watching the sunrise over the forest. The legal proceedings against the Pearsons were ongoing, with multiple charges filed related to data privacy violations and wire fraud. Westridge was under new leadership, with Olivia Thompson serving as interim CEO while they searched for a permanent replacement. Sarah had been promoted to Chief Information Security Officer. She'd called yesterday to tell me they were rebuilding the security team with a focus on ethical data handling and robust protections. "We're implementing everything you taught us," she'd said, "but documenting it better this time." I smiled. At that, 20 years of building systems, mentoring professionals, and establishing a security-first culture hadn't been erased after all. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Board-approved settlement. Paperwork coming today. They recognized your whistleblower status. Substantially more than standard severance. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't done it for money. I'd done it because some principles matter more than job titles or corporate politics, because 20 years of building something should count for something." That afternoon, I drove into the nearby town of Hood River to meet with the director of a local community college. They were looking for someone to help develop their cybersecurity program, teaching the next generation not just the technical aspects of security, but the ethical foundation that had to go with it. As I parked outside the modest administration building, I thought about the lesson I'd learned from all this. Technical knowledge is powerful, but ethical judgment determines how that power is used. I couldn't control how others chose to use their knowledge, but I could share mine with those who might use it wisely. Some might call that old-fashioned thinking in an industry obsessed with disruption and growth at all costs. I just call it doing the right thing. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came 3 days after my uncomfortable meeting with Gregory and Nathan. I was at my desk finishing documentation on our latest security update when Sarah rushed into my office without knocking, something she'd never done before. "They're moving up the timeline," she said, her voice barely above a whisper despite my office door being closed. "Nathan's team is already setting up in the East Wing conference rooms. They've requisitioned 5 workstations with admin access privileges." I set down my coffee mug slowly. "When?" "Tomorrow. They're not waiting for the all-hands announcement. Gregory told HR to accelerate your transition package." Sarah's eyes darted to my computer screen, "and they've asked for credential audits on all our secure systems." This wasn't just an accelerated timeline, it was a calculated move to catch me off guard, giving me minimal time to prepare any transition materials. "Have they specifically requested anything from you?" I asked. Sarah nodded. "Access logs, authentication protocols, and a list of all emergency response procedures." She hesitated. "And Nathan specifically asked about any unofficial workarounds we might have implemented over the years." That last request sent a chill through me. In 20 years of building systems, we'd certainly created our share of patchwork solutions during emergencies. Authentication bypasses, hard-coded access credentials in legacy systems, and admin accounts that didn't follow standard naming conventions. Nothing irresponsible, just the reality of maintaining complex systems that had evolved over decades, rather than being built from scratch with perfect documentation. "Give them what's in the official documentation," I said carefully. "If they need more detail, they can follow up with specific questions." Sarah understood immediately. She'd been with me through enough crises to know that our most critical backup systems weren't prominently featured in user manuals. Not because we were hiding anything, but because documenting every detail of recovery protocols created its own security vulnerabilities. After she left, I opened my secure password manager and began a systematic review of our critical systems. The master production environment, our client database servers, the network security infrastructure. I verified that everything was properly documented in our transition materials. Almost everything. I deliberately omitted 3 emergency access protocols. First, the Disaster Recovery Administrator account embedded in our backup systems, the one that could restore entire server environments if primary systems failed. Second, a secure FTP server we maintained as an air-gapped backup for our most sensitive client data, physically located in a server closet that had been repurposed when we expanded our office 5 years ago. The closet didn't appear on updated floor plans, and the server itself wasn't connected to our network except during scheduled backups. Third, a set of encryption keys stored on a secure USB drive in my office safe. Keys that would be needed if anyone wanted to access archived client data more than 3 years old. These omissions weren't about sabotage. They were insurance. Something about Nathan's urgency to access everything immediately set off alarm bells. In 20 years of IT security, I'd learned that people who want total access without following proper protocols rarely have good intentions. That evening, I received a call from Marcus in HR. His normally friendly tone was replaced with stiff formality. "Michael, I'm calling to inform you that we've revised your transition timeline. Given project deadlines and Nathan's team's availability, we'll need to complete the handover by end of day tomorrow." "That's not feasible, Marcus," I replied calmly. "We're talking about security architecture built over 2 decades. The documentation alone would take days to review properly. I understand your concern, but this decision comes directly from Gregory." His voice lowered slightly. "Between us, there's been some discussion about potential system vulnerabilities that need immediate attention. Nathan's team has flagged several concerns." This was news to me. "What vulnerabilities specifically?" "My team runs comprehensive security audits quarterly. Nothing critical has been flagged." "I don't have those details," Marcus said, sounding uncomfortable. "I'm just communicating the decision. You'll need to turn in your credentials and company devices by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Your severance package has been adjusted to compensate for the shortened transition period." After hanging up, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing this development. If Nathan had allegedly found vulnerabilities my team hadn't identified, either he was exceptionally talented, which I doubted, or he was manufacturing concerns to justify my accelerated departure. I called Sarah from my personal phone. "Have you heard anything about security vulnerabilities being flagged by Nathan's team?" I asked when she answered. "No," she said. "Nothing has come through official channels, but Nathan's been asking odd questions about our client data architecture, specifically how we segment financial services clients from healthcare ones and what encryption we use for data at rest. Has he given any reason for his interest?" "He mentioned something about cross-sector data analytics opportunities that could leverage synergies between industry verticals." Sarah's tone made it clear what she thought of this corporate speak. It sounded like he wants to compare data patterns across different types of clients. "That would violate most of our client contracts," I said, feeling increasingly uneasy. "We're explicitly prohibited from cross-analyzing client data. Each client's environment is supposed to be completely isolated." That's what I told him. He said it was a hypothetical exploration at this stage. After our call, I did something I'd never done before. I logged into our systems after hours from my home computer, using my emergency credentials. I wasn't looking to cause trouble. I just wanted to see what Nathan and his team had been accessing. The security logs told a concerning story. In the past 48 hours, Nathan's credentials had been used to access configuration settings for our data segmentation systems, the very architectures that kept client data isolated. There had also been multiple unsuccessful attempts to access our encrypted archive storage, which held historical client data. Most troubling, someone had attempted to modify the logging parameters for our security alert system, specifically the alerts that would trigger if large amounts of data were exported from secured servers. The changes hadn't gone through because they required secondary authentication from another administrator. But the intent was clear. Someone wanted to move data without triggering alarms. I documented everything meticulously, taking screenshots and downloading log files. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. I just believed in having evidence if questions arose later. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, well before most employees would be in. I needed time to secure a few things before the rushed handover. First, I retrieved the encryption key drive from my office safe and made a secure backup. I didn't take the original, that would be company property, but I ensured a protected copy existed elsewhere. Next, I wrote detailed instructions about our most critical security systems and saved them to an encrypted file on my personal drive. Not passwords or access credentials, just honest documentation about how things were built and why certain decisions had been made over the years. Information that should have been included in a proper transition, but wouldn't be possible, given the accelerated timeline. As I was finishing this task, there was a knock at my office door. It was James Rodriguez, our threat intelligence specialist. "Got a minute?" he asked, closing the door behind him. His normally relaxed demeanor was replaced with tense alertness. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I've been monitoring some unusual network traffic patterns," he said, keeping his voice low. "Last night around 2 a.m. someone used elevated credentials to run queries against our client database, not accessing any specific client's data, but pulling metadata about data structures, fields, and relationship maps." "Nathan's credentials?" James shook his head. "That's the thing. It was Gregory's account. But the access pattern doesn't match his typical usage. It was systematic, programmatic almost, like someone using a script to map our entire data architecture. This was concerning. Gregory barely used our technical systems himself, typically having his assistant handle anything computer-related. Him running complex database queries in the middle of the night was highly improbable. Could someone have compromised his account? I asked. Possibly, but they'd need his device and his MFA authentication. More likely, he shared his credentials with someone. "With Nathan," I said, the pieces falling into place. James nodded grimly. "That would be my guess. But why use Gregory's account unless they're doing something they don't want associated with Nathan's account?" I finished. "Something they know would raise flags if security was monitoring a new admin's activities." "Exactly." James handed me a flash drive. "I've documented everything here. Timestamps, query patterns, the data they were examining. I thought you should know before." He glanced at the boxes I'd started packing. "Thank you," I said, taking the drive. "Be careful, James. Document everything, but don't confront them directly." "What are they looking for?" he asked. "I don't know yet, but whatever it is, they're in a hurry to get it before anyone notices." By mid-morning, the office was buzzing with rumors about my sudden departure. Colleagues stopped by with awkward goodbyes, uncertain what to say. Most had heard only that I was being replaced as part of a modernization initiative, but the hasty nature of the transition had raised eyebrows. Diane Kim, our ethical hacking expert, was more direct when she visited. "This is about the HealthStream contract, isn't it?" she asked after closing my office door. HealthStream was our largest healthcare client, a network of regional hospitals that used our systems to manage patient data across multiple facilities. "What makes you say that?" I asked, careful not to show surprise. "Nathan's been asking very specific questions about their data architecture, wanted to know how we segment patient records, billing information, and research data. When I told him those systems were designed to be completely isolated per HIPAA requirements, he seemed frustrated. Did he say why he was interested?" Diane's expression was grim. "He mentioned something about untapped analytical potential in anonymized patient data. I reminded him that our contract with HealthStream explicitly prohibits using their data for anything other than providing our contracted services. He said policies could be reinterpreted with the right legal approach." This was worse than I'd feared. HealthStream's contract was crystal clear. Their patient data could not be used for any secondary purposes, anonymized or not. Any attempt to reinterpret those terms would not only violate our contract, but potentially run afoul of federal regulations. Keep a record of these conversations, I advised, and if you're asked to make any changes to the HealthStream data, segmentation, insist on getting the request in writing with legal sign-off. Diane nodded, understanding the subtext. We were both creating a paper trail. At 11 a.m., Gregory summoned me to his office for what he called a transition check-in. When I arrived, Nathan was already there, seated in one of the visitor chairs like he belonged there. "Michael," Gregory greeted me with artificial warmth. "Please sit down. I wanted to touch base about the handover today. How are things progressing?" "As well as can be expected given the compressed timeline," I replied neutrally. "I've prepared documentation on our primary systems, but there's simply not enough time to properly transition 20 years of institutional knowledge in a single day." Gregory waved away my concern. "I'm confident in Nathan's ability to get up to speed quickly. He has an exceptional talent for systems architecture." Nathan smiled with practiced humility. "I'm sure Michael's documentation will be comprehensive, and of course his team remains in place to fill in any gaps." Something in his tone when he mentioned his team sent a warning signal. I'd been so focused on my own abrupt departure that I hadn't fully considered what it meant for my staff. "Speaking of the team," I said carefully, "I hope you recognize the depth of expertise there. Sarah, James, Diane, they've built and maintained these systems alongside me for years." "Of course," Nathan said smoothly, "though I will be bringing in a few specialists from my previous company to help modernize certain aspects of our approach. I believe in blending existing knowledge with fresh perspectives." Translation. He was already planning to push out my people and replace them with his own. Gregory cleared his throat. "Michael, there is one specific matter we wanted to discuss before you leave today. Our legal team has flagged some concerns about additional access methods that might exist within our systems. Emergency backdoors or undocumented administrator accounts created during your tenure." So that was it. They were fishing for the disaster recovery accounts and other emergency systems I hadn't prominently featured in the transition documents. "All standard emergency protocols are documented in our disaster recovery plan," I said, which was technically true. The existence of the Recovery Administrator account was documented, just not its current credentials or complete capabilities. "Yes, we've reviewed those," Nathan interjected, "but in systems as mature as ours, it's common for unofficial workarounds to develop over time, legacy access methods that might not appear in standard documentation." I met his gaze steadily. "Our security architecture has evolved organically over 2 decades, so yes, there are legacy systems with their own authentication methods. All of them are documented somewhere, though not necessarily in a single place. That's why a proper transition period is essential." Gregory leaned forward. "Michael, let me be direct. We need you to provide a comprehensive list of all access methods, documented or otherwise, before you leave today. It's a matter of company security." The irony of him lecturing me about security wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'll do my best with the time available. Though I'm curious, has something specific prompted this concern?" "Just standard due diligence," Gregory replied too quickly. "When leadership changes, it's important to ensure all access points are properly transferred." I nodded as if I accepted this explanation. "I'll compile what I can before I leave." After leaving their office, I went straight to Sarah's desk. "Can you gather the team for lunch? Something off-site. Tell them it's my farewell lunch." She understood immediately. The Thai place on 4th Avenue at noon? Perfect. An hour later, I sat in a private room at Bangkok Cuisine with my core team, Sarah, James, Diane, and 2 senior engineers, Tom and Rachel. After the server closed, the door, I spoke candidly. Something's happening with the health stream data. Nathan and possibly Gregory are exploring ways to use it for purposes outside our contract. I don't have concrete proof of their intentions, but the pattern is concerning. They've been mapping our data architecture, asking about segmentation, and looking for ways to access archived client information. James nodded. They've also been investigating our data export mechanisms. Nathan asked me yesterday how we handle bulk data transfers in emergency scenarios, and whether transfers would be logged in our security systems, added Diane. He framed it as a disaster recovery question. But why would the new head of security not want activities logged? He asked me about our encryption key management, Sarah said, specifically whether keys for archived data were stored on separate systems from current data. I took this all in, the picture becoming clearer. They're planning to access and likely export client data, particularly from HealthStream, possibly for some kind of secondary analysis that violates our contracts and regulations. They want to do it quickly, before anyone notices, which explains the rushed transition. What can we do? Tom asked. If we raise objections, they'll just fire us. They're already bringing in Nathan's people. It was a valid concern. With me gone, my team would be vulnerable. Here's what I suggest, I said after a moment of thought. Don't obstruct them directly. Do your jobs as instructed, but document everything. If you're asked to do something that explicitly violates our security policies or client contracts, ask for the request in writing. Create records of everything. And in the meantime? Rachel asked. In the meantime, I have a plan. But the less you know about it, the better protected you'll be. Just know that I'm not going to let 20 years of building ethical systems be undermined in a matter of days. As we finished lunch, I handed Sarah a sealed envelope. If anything happens, if there's a security breach, data exposure, or if any of you face retaliation for following proper protocols, open this. It contains contact information for people who can help. Inside was contact information for a trusted journalist who specialized in data privacy issues, a regulatory attorney I'd consulted with during HIPAA implementation, and Olivia Thompson, a board member with a background in compliance who'd always shown genuine interest in our security practices. Back at the office, I spent my final hours creating the appearance of full cooperation. I compiled a detailed list of our standard access methods and authentication systems, carefully documenting everything that was already in our official records. For the disaster recovery systems and the secure FTP server, I included only their existence and general purpose, not the specific credentials or detailed access methods. It wasn't deception, it was professional caution. In 20 years of security work, I'd learned that complete access should never be granted without proper validation and necessity. Nathan hadn't demonstrated either. At 4:30 p.m., Nathan and a woman I didn't recognize appeared at my office door. "Michael, this is Veronica King from IT Asset Management," Nathan said. "She's here to facilitate the collection of your company devices and credential deactivation." Veronica didn't meet my eyes as she handed me a checklist of items to surrender: laptop, phone, access badges, encryption keys, and any physical documents related to company systems. I complied without complaint, providing everything on the list, except for the personal notes I'd made about system architecture. Those weren't company property, but my own reference materials created over years of building these systems. "I'll need you to sign this form confirming you've surrendered all company assets and have no active credentials or access methods to Westridge Systems," Veronica said, sliding a document across my desk. I read it carefully. The form included A declaration that I had disclosed all known access methods, authentication credentials, and security bypasses that I had created or been aware of. It was clearly drafted by legal, designed to create liability if any undisclosed access routes were discovered later. "I'll need to review this with HR," I said, not signing. "Some of these declarations go beyond standard offboarding procedures." Nathan's expression tightened slightly. "It's a standard form, Michael. Everyone signs it. If it's standard, then Marcus should be familiar with it. I'd like him to walk me through it." After an awkward standoff, Veronica called Marcus, who arrived looking uncomfortable. "Is there a problem with the offboarding form?" he asked. I handed it to him. "This includes declarations about security systems that go well beyond normal exit procedures. Has this been reviewed by legal?" Marcus scanned the document, frowning slightly. "This isn't our standard form. Where did this come from?" Nathan intervened smoothly. "It's an updated version for IT security personnel. Given Michael's level of system access, we needed more comprehensive declarations." "Then it should have gone through proper channels," Marcus said, showing unexpected backbone. "Michael, use our standard offboarding form for now. If additional declarations are needed, legal can follow up separately." Nathan looked like he wanted to object, but thought better of it. Marcus provided the standard form, which I signed without hesitation. It simply confirmed I was returning company property and would maintain confidentiality about proprietary information, perfectly reasonable requirements. As 5 p.m. approached, I packed the last of my personal items into a cardboard box. 20 years of building Westridge's security infrastructure, reduced to a coffee mug, a few books, and a small glass award for establishing our first SOC2 compliance certification. Sarah appeared in my doorway, her eyes suspiciously red. "Need help carrying anything?" "I'm traveling light," I said with a smile. "The best security experts don't leave much behind." She closed the door and lowered her voice. "They've already started reassigning responsibilities. James is being moved to user support, and Diane's position is being evaluated. They're moving fast, Michael. Keep your head down," I advised. "Document everything, and remember what I said at lunch." As we walked to the elevator, several team members had gathered for awkward goodbyes. The atmosphere was somber, with everyone sensing that this wasn't just a routine leadership change. "You built something important here," James said quietly, "no matter what happens next." Diane gave me a firm handshake. "We'll protect what we can." Tom and Rachel said nothing, just nodded respectfully. They had families, mortgages, responsibilities. I understood their caution. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of my team, the people I'd mentored, challenged, and grown with over years. Whatever Nathan and Gregory were planning, these professionals would be caught in the middle. I needed to find a way to protect them while still preventing potential data misuse. Outside, in the spring evening sunlight, I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, looking up at the Westridge logo atop our building. The company had grown from a small regional software provider to an industry leader, built on reliable products and client trust. I had helped create that foundation of trust through rigorous security practices and ethical data handling. Now I had to find a way to preserve it, even from the outside. I reached for my phone to call a rideshare, then remembered my company phone had been surrendered. Using my personal phone instead, I requested a car and waited, mentally reviewing my situation. I no longer had official access to Westridge systems, but I did have the knowledge of how they were built. I knew which logs would record what activities, which alerts would trigger under specific conditions, and where the evidence would be stored if someone attempted to misuse client data. More importantly, I still had that disaster recovery account, not because I intended to access systems maliciously, but because proper security practice demanded that emergency access routes not be compromised during leadership transitions. Until I was confident that proper security protocols were being maintained, I had a professional obligation to ensure those emergency systems remained viable. As my ride approached, I made a decision. I wouldn't actively interfere with whatever Nathan and Gregory were planning. Instead, I would watch, wait, and document. If they were simply modernizing systems as claimed, I would quietly remove my emergency access and move on. But if they were attempting to exploit client data in ways that violated contracts and regulations, I would ensure there was a record that couldn't be erased. 20 years in security had taught me patience. Sometimes the most effective response wasn't immediate action, but careful preparation for the moment when action became necessary. As I settled into the back seat of the car, I felt a curious sense of calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for protecting Westridge's systems from external threats. But I had one final mission, protecting those systems from threats within. And unlike external hackers, I knew exactly how those systems worked, down to the last line of code. If Nathan and Gregory were planning what I suspected, they were about to learn that technical knowledge wasn't just about flashy presentations and buzzwords. It was about understanding systems so thoroughly that you could predict how they would respond under pressure. And right now, Westridge's systems were under more pressure than they knew. The first week after my departure passed quietly, too quietly. I'd expected some immediate action from Nathan and Gregory given their rushed timeline, but my sources inside Westridge reported only administrative changes, new reporting structures, team reorganizations, and updated security protocols that seemed designed to consolidate control rather than improve protection. I maintained my apartment like a command center with multiple monitors tracking news about Westridge, industry updates on data security regulations, and anonymous messages from my former team members who were using our prearranged secure communication channels. Each morning, I checked for any unusual activity in Westridge's publicly visible systems, their website, client portals, and press releases. Nothing suspicious appeared, just standard corporate updates and product announcements. On day 8, the first significant development came through an encrypted message from Sarah. N has created a new data analytics platform separate from our main infrastructure. 4 people from his previous company have been granted access. No documentation on purpose or scope. This was concerning, but not conclusive. A separate analytics platform could have legitimate purposes, internal performance monitoring, for instance, but combined with Nathan's previous questions about client data segmentation, it raised red flags. I replied with a single question, connected to production systems. Her response came hours later. Not yet. Building isolated environment first. Asked about data transformation tools for anonymizing medical records. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They were preparing an environment to receive and process client data, specifically healthcare information, while keeping it separate from Westridge's main systems. This would allow them to work without triggering standard security monitoring or creating obvious audit trails. The next day, I decided to take a more active approach. Using the disaster recovery account, I logged into Westridge's systems during off hours to check the security logs. This wasn't about snooping or sabotage. It was about verifying suspicions and ensuring proper controls remained in place. The logs confirmed what Sarah had reported. A new subnet had been established within Westridge's network architecture, isolated from normal monitoring systems. Multiple new user accounts had been created with elevated privileges, all reporting through Nathan rather than following standard security protocols. Most concerning, several temporary access keys had been generated for the HealthStream data repositories, keys that would allow bulk data export without triggering normal usage alerts. I documented everything meticulously, capturing screenshots and copying log entries. I wasn't acting as a vigilante. I was behaving as any responsible security professional would when observing potential policy violations. The evidence was concerning, but still circumstantial. Nothing explicitly prohibited setting up separate analytics environments or generating temporary access keys if done for legitimate business purposes. 2 days later, James sent a message that shifted the situation from concerning to alarming. They've begun data transfers, HealthStream patient records moving to new environment. N told team it's for security testing, but no test plan documented, bypassing standard audit logging. MD, this crossed the line from suspicious behavior to clear policy violation. Westridge's security standards require detailed documentation for any movement of protected health information, including test scenarios. Moving patient data to a separate environment without proper controls and documentation potentially violated both company policy and federal regulations. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. That night, I used the disaster recovery account again. This time focusing specifically on data transfer logs. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Over the past 36 hours, millions of patient records had been exported from the HealthStream repositories to the new environment. The exports included not just anonymized metadata, but complete records containing diagnosis codes, treatment histories, and billing information. While patient names and direct identifiers had been tokenized, replaced with random identifiers, the process preserved all relationships between records, meaning the data remained effectively identifiable when analyzed. As a whole, more troubling, the transfers weren't just from HealthStream. Similar exports had begun from First Capital Banking Group and National Care Insurance, other major clients with sensitive data protected by strict contractual terms and regulatory requirements. This wasn't security testing. It was systematic extraction of client data for some undisclosed purpose. I needed to act, but carefully. Direct intervention could be portrayed as unauthorized system access by a former employee. Contacting clients directly might violate my own confidentiality obligations to Westridge. And approaching Gregory, or the board would likely be futile given their apparent involvement. I decided on a 3-part strategy. First, I would continue documenting everything thoroughly, creating an unassailable record of the activities and policy violations. Second, I would establish a secure communication channel with Olivia Thompson, the board member with a background in compliance, without explicitly accusing anyone until I had conclusive evidence. And third, I would create a technical safeguard, not to damage systems or prevent legitimate business, but to ensure that any major data exfiltration would leave unmistakable fingerprints for investigators. The next morning, I drafted a carefully worded email to Olivia Thompson. Rather than making accusations, I framed it as a professional courtesy. Ms. Thompson, as you may know, I recently departed from my role as IT Systems Director at Westridge after 20 years of service. During my tenure, I implemented numerous data protection controls to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements for our healthcare and financial services clients. I've been reflecting on the rapid transition of these responsibilities and wanted to offer my assistance should any questions arise about the architecture of these compliance systems. Given your background in this area, I thought you might appreciate having a direct contact for any historical context needed during this transition period. It was deliberately understated, nothing that could be construed as whistleblowing or accusation. Just a professional extending courtesy to a board member with relevant interests. If everything at Westridge was above board, she would likely send a polite acknowledgement and nothing more, But if she shared my concerns about Nathan's activities, this opened a door for further communication. Her response came within hours. "Mr. Anderson, thank you for reaching out. Coincidentally, I've had some questions about our compliance architecture that haven't been adequately addressed in recent briefings. I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss these matters in person rather than via email. Would you be available for coffee tomorrow morning?" The subtext was clear. She wanted to talk privately, away from corporate communications channels that might be monitored. I agreed to meet at a small cafe in Kirkland, away from Westridge's offices. The following morning I arrived early and chose a table in the back corner with a view of both entrances. Olivia arrived precisely on time, dressed in business attire but without anything identifying her as a Westridge board member. After brief pleasantries, she got straight to the point. "I'll be direct, Mr. Anderson. Your abrupt departure and the accelerated transition have raised concerns for me. As chair of the audit committee, I should have been consulted about any significant changes to our security leadership, especially given our client profile in regulated industries." "The decision came from Gregory directly," I replied carefully. "I was told it was for modernization purposes." Olivia's expression turned skeptical. "That's the official line. Unofficially, several board members have questioned the timing and approach. Gregory has been pushing for what he calls data monetization strategies in recent meetings, ways to derive additional revenue from our existing client relationships. When I've asked for specifics about how these strategies comply with our contractual obligations, I've received vague assurances rather than concrete plans. This aligned perfectly with what I'd observed. Data monetization in itself isn't problematic if done transparently and with client consent, I noted, but it requires careful compliance review and explicit contractual terms. "Exactly," Olivia said, lowering her voice, "which is why I'm concerned about Nathan's new analytics initiative that's been implemented with minimal board visibility. I've requested documentation on data flows and compliance controls for this project twice now. Each time, I've been told it's still in development, and documentation will be provided when ready." I maintained a neutral expression, not wanting to show how alarming this was. Board members, especially those leading audit committees, should never be denied compliance documentation for active projects. "Ms. Thompson, Olivia, please." "Olivia, may I ask if you've seen any evidence of data being transferred to this new analytics environment?" She hesitated, glancing around the cafe before responding. "I don't have direct access to technical logs, but I've seen preliminary marketing materials for a new service offering called Health Trends Analytics that promises unprecedented insights across healthcare provider networks, drawing on millions of real-world patient journeys. When I asked about the data sources for this product, Nathan said it would use properly anonymized aggregate data from consenting partners." My stomach tightened. HealthStream and our other healthcare clients had never consented to such use of their data. Their contracts explicitly prohibited it. "I've been in this industry a long time," Olivia continued. "Enough to know that launching a data analytics product requires months of data preparation. If they're already creating marketing materials, the data processing has already begun." She fixed me with a direct look. "What I can't determine is whether proper protocols have been followed." I chose my next words carefully. "As of my departure, no client had authorized use of their data for external analytics products. Our contracts, particularly with healthcare clients, specifically prohibit secondary use of patient data without explicit written amendments to the master service agreements." Olivia nodded slowly. "That's what I suspected. And now we have a new security director with minimal compliance experience, a rushed transition of our most experienced security leader, and a CEO pushing for data monetization, while providing minimal transparency to the board. It's a concerning pattern, I acknowledged. Do you have any evidence? She asked directly. Not suppositions or concerns, but actual documentation that would demonstrate policy violations? This was the moment of truth. I could share what I'd discovered through my disaster recovery access, but doing so might compromise my own position, or I could hold back, waiting for more definitive proof while potential violations continued. I decided on a middle path. I've received information from current employees indicating that patient data has been moved to a separate environment without proper documentation or controls. I can't verify this directly, but if true, it would violate both company policy and potentially HIPAA regulations. Olivia processed this information, her expression grave. That's serious, but still circumstantial, without technical confirmation. She paused. I need to tread carefully here. As a board member, I have fiduciary duties to the company, but also responsibility for ensuring regulatory compliance. If I raise these concerns without definitive evidence, I'll be dismissed as overreacting. What would constitute definitive evidence for you? I asked. System logs showing unauthorized data transfers, documentation of the intended use that contradicts our client contracts, communications showing awareness that these activities violate agreements. She sighed. But I have no way to access such information without going through channels Nathan now controls. I nodded, understanding her dilemma. If such evidence were to become available, how would you want to receive it? She met my gaze directly. Through proper channels that protect both the company and any individuals involved, perhaps via our external auditors as part of an anonymous compliance tip. She slid a business card across the table with a handwritten email address on the RT. Back. Our annual SOC2 audit begins next week. Martinson & Bell is the firm handling it. The message was clear. If I had evidence, I should provide it anonymously to the auditors rather than directly to her, maintaining deniability for both of us. After our meeting, I drove home with a clearer sense of purpose. Olivia's concerns validated my own, and knowing that the SOC2 audit was imminent provided a natural mechanism for bringing any violations to light without directly intervening in Westridge's systems. That evening, I received an unexpected message from Diane. N-authorized production connection to analytics environment. Full access to client databases granted to Pearson Analytics Group contractors. No DLP controls or audit logging enabled. This was the smoking gun. Connecting the isolated environment to production systems with external contractors given access was a clear security violation. Disabling data loss. Prevention controls and audit logging removed the very safeguards designed to prevent unauthorized data extraction. I needed to verify this personally. Using the disaster recovery account, I logged in once more, focusing specifically on connection logs for the production databases. What I found exceeded even my worst expectations. Massive data extraction operations were underway, copying terabytes of client data from production systems to the isolated environment. From there, additional transfers were sending data to external IP addresses belonging to cloud storage accounts not controlled by Westridge. The pattern was unmistakable. They were extracting client data en masse and moving it outside company infrastructure entirely. Most damning of all, I found a project brief document in Nathan's directory titled Pearson Analytics Data Strategy, PDF. The document outlined a business plan for a new company called Pearson Analytics Group, which would offer cross-industry insights leveraging the vast data resources of Westridge clients. It explicitly mentioned using healthcare data to develop predictive models marketable to pharmaceutical companies and financial services data to create consumer behavior profiles for targeted marketing. The document acknowledged the contractual restrictions but proposed a strategy of technical anonymization with preserved analytical value, essentially stripping direct identifiers while maintaining the ability to derive valuable patterns. It also included a revenue projection based on selling these derived insights to third parties without informing the original data owners. This wasn't just a policy violation. It was a deliberate plan to misappropriate client data for private gain. I documented everything methodically, capturing screenshots, downloading the project brief, and recording the data transfer logs. I compiled it all into a comprehensive report without editorializing. Just facts, timestamps, and direct evidence from Westridge's own systems. The next morning, using a new email account created through an anonymous service, I sent the complete package to the contact at Martinson & Bell that Olivia had provided, with the subject line, "Potential Compliance Violations for Upcoming Westridge SOC2 Audit." The body of the email was simple and factual. As part of your upcoming SOC2 audit of Westridge Technologies, you should be aware of potential compliance violations related to client data handling. The attached documentation shows unauthorized extraction of protected healthcare information and financial services data in violation of both regulatory requirements and client contracts. This information is being provided anonymously out of concern for proper compliance practices. Now, all I could do was wait. The SOC2 audit would begin in 3 days, and auditors were required to investigate any credible compliance tips they received, regardless of source. If they found what I had found, there would be no way for Nathan and Gregory to sweep it under the rug. That afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Cautiously, I answered. "Is this Michael Anderson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Amanda Martinez. I'm an investigator with the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Health and Human Services." Her tone was formal, professional. "We've received an anonymous tip regarding potential HIPAA violations at Westridge Technologies involving patient data from several healthcare providers. As the recent former IT systems director, we'd like to speak with you about their data handling practices." My mouth went dry. The situation had escalated faster than I'd anticipated. HHS was the federal agency responsible for enforcing HIPAA regulations, and their involvement meant this had already moved beyond an internal compliance matter. "I see," I said carefully. "May I ask what specifically you're investigating?" "We've received information suggesting that protected health information is being extracted from its authorized environments and potentially being prepared for unauthorized secondary use. Given your recent position, we believe you may have relevant insights into the data architecture and security controls," I thought quickly. Cooperating with federal investigators was the right thing to do, but I needed to be careful about revealing my own post-employment access to Westridge systems. "I'm willing to discuss the data architecture and security controls that were in place during my tenure," I said. "When would you like to meet? We can have someone at your location tomorrow morning if that works for you. This is a priority investigation given the volume of patient data potentially involved." We arranged the details, and after hanging up I sat back, processing this development. Things were moving much faster than I'd expected. Someone else had apparently reported concerns to HHS directly, possibly one of my former team members. Or perhaps Olivia had felt obligated to escalate after our conversation. Whatever the source, the situation had moved beyond my control. Federal investigators were now involved, and the evidence I'd gathered would likely become part of a formal investigation. I needed to prepare carefully for tomorrow's meeting, deciding what I could share about Westridge's systems without incriminating myself. That evening, I received a flurry of messages from my former team members. From Sarah, federal investigators in the office, all access to healthcare data systems frozen. From James, having closed-door meeting with Gregory and legal team, looks intense. From Diane, they've pulled my access logs for the past month, asked specifically about data transfers to the analytics environment. Something major was happening, and happening quickly. I decided to check Westridge's systems one last time, not to gather more evidence, but to ensure my disaster recovery account hadn't been discovered. When I attempted to log in, I was relieved to find the account still active, but alarmed to see massive deletion operations underway across multiple systems. Log files were being purged, documentation deleted, and the entire analytics environment was being dismantled. They were covering their tracks, destroying evidence ahead of the investigation. I had anticipated this possibility. Weeks earlier, I had configured the disaster recovery system to maintain shadow copies of critical logs and system states, a standard security practice to protect against ransomware that would encrypt or delete system files. These shadow copies were stored on the isolated backup server, unconnected to the main network except during scheduled backups. Now, that precaution would preserve evidence that might otherwise be lost. I didn't need to do anything. The system was working as designed, silently maintaining secure copies even as the originals were being deleted. As a final measure, I composed an email to myself, documenting my actions and rationale. I explained that my post-employment access had been solely to verify security concerns, that I had not modified any systems or data, and that all my actions were consistent with my professional obligations as a security expert who had observed potential regulatory violations. I included a complete timeline with detailed logs of my own access, being completely transparent about what I had done and why. I didn't know if this would ever be needed, but if questions arose about my own conduct, I wanted a contemporaneous record of my thought process and actions. I encrypted this document and stored it securely, then powered down my computer and prepared for tomorrow's meeting. As I stood by my window, watching the lights of Seattle glimmer across Lake Washington, I felt an odd sense of calm. For 20 years, I had protected Westridge's systems, and by extension, their clients' data. That mission hadn't ended with my termination letter. In many ways, these past weeks had been the ultimate expression of that responsibility. Protecting the systems, even from those nominally in charge of them. Whatever happened next, I had done my job. The systems I'd built had worked as designed. Not just the technical safeguards, but also the human networks of professionals who recognized when something was wrong. Sarah, James, Diane, and the others had seen the violations and found ways to raise alarms without putting themselves at risk. Olivia had recognized the governance failure and found a way to address it within her fiduciary responsibilities. Even the auditors and federal investigators were part of the broader system of checks and balances that protected sensitive data from misuse. Nathan and Gregory had fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with. They saw security as an obstacle to be circumvented, controls as limitations to be removed. They didn't recognize that these systems weren't just technical configurations, but embodiments of ethical principles and professional standards that people like me had spent careers developing. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. I might face difficult questions about my actions, possibly even legal scrutiny. But I was prepared to defend every decision with the simple truth. I had acted as any responsible security professional would when observing potential harm to systems under my care. As I finally prepared for bed, my phone buzzed one last time, a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for what you've done. Some of us were afraid to speak up. You weren't." It took me a moment to place the initial. Tom, one of the senior engineers from my team who had remained silent during our farewell lunch, concerned about his family and financial responsibilities. That simple message meant more than any corporate award or recognition I'd received in 20 years. It reminded me why the work mattered, not for companies or systems, but for the people who depended on them, both the professionals who maintained them and the countless individuals whose personal information they protected. Tomorrow would come with its own battles, but tonight I knew I had made the right choice. The federal investigators arrived precisely at 9 a.m. the next morning, a man and woman in conservative business attire who introduced themselves as Amanda Martinez and Daniel Cohen from the HHS Office for Civil Rights. I'd prepared my apartment for their visit, clearing my dining table to serve as a meeting space and organizing my notes about Westridge's security architecture. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us, Mr. Anderson," Amanda began after they settled in. "We understand you recently left Westridge Technologies after a long tenure as their IT systems director." 20 years, I confirmed, until 3 weeks ago. "And can you tell us about the circumstances of your departure?" Daniel asked, his pen poised over a notepad. I maintained a neutral tone. The CEO, Gregory Pearson, decided to restructure the security leadership. He wanted his son Nathan, who has a background in computer science, to take over my department. I was informed this was part of a modernization initiative. Amanda nodded. "Were you given any specific performance-related reasons for this replacement?" "No. I was told they needed someone with a fresh perspective and modern approach to security. My transition period was initially set for 2 weeks but was later accelerated to a single day. That seems unusually rushed for a leadership role involving sensitive systems," Daniel observed. "I thought so too," I replied carefully, "especially given the complex security architecture I'd built over 2 decades. Amanda shifted gears. "Can you describe Westridge's obligations regarding protected health information? I understand you handled data for several healthcare providers." This was safer territory, factual information about system architecture rather than the politics of my departure. Westridge provides software solutions for healthcare providers, including HealthStream, a network of regional hospitals. Our systems manage everything from patient records to billing. Under both HIPAA regulations and our client contracts, we're required to maintain strict data segregation, access controls, and audit trails for any interaction with protected health information. "And what safeguards did you implement to ensure compliance?" Daniel asked. For the next hour, I walked them through Westridge's security architecture, the authentication systems, data segregation protocols, encryption standards, and audit mechanisms. I explained how client data was isolated, how access was strictly controlled based on role and necessity, and how all interactions with protected data were logged for compliance verification. "These protocols sound comprehensive," Amanda noted. "Were they documented in your security policies?" "Extensively," I confirmed. Every control had corresponding documentation, regular compliance reviews, and annual audits. We maintained SOC, new compliance, and underwent regular HIPAA security assessments. Daniel looked up from his notes. "Based on your expertise, would it be possible for someone to extract large volumes of patient data without triggering security alerts?" This was the crux of the matter. Not if the systems were functioning. "As designed," I said carefully, "any bulk data access or extraction would generate multiple alerts, require proper authorization, and leave comprehensive audit trails. Our systems were specifically designed to prevent unauthorized data movement. Yet we've received information suggesting exactly that has occurred," Amanda said, watching my reaction closely. "Large volumes of patient data allegedly transferred to an environment outside normal security controls." I met her gaze steadily. If that's true, it would require deliberately bypassing or disabling multiple security systems. It couldn't happen, accidentally or without awareness, that security protocols were being violated. Have you witnessed or become aware of any such activity? Daniel asked directly. This was the moment I'd prepared for. How much to reveal about what I knew without disclosing my continued access to Westridge systems. Since my departure, I've received concerning information from current Westridge employees, I said carefully. They've described the creation of a separate analytics environment with minimal security controls, bulk data transfers from client databases to this environment, and the disabling of normal audit mechanisms. If accurate, these actions would violate both company policy and regulatory requirements. Do you have any documentation of these alleged activities? Amanda asked. I've been gathering information from current employees who have expressed concerns, I replied, which was technically true. I can provide you with a timeline of reported events and the specific security protocols that would be violated by such actions. I handed them a folder containing the timeline I'd prepared, carefully omitting any references to my direct system access, but including all the key events and violations. The document detailed the creation of the separate analytics environment, the connection to production systems, the disabled security controls, and the data transfers to external locations. Daniel reviewed it with a frown. This timeline mentions Pearson Analytics Group receiving data exports. What is that entity? Based on information from current employees, it appears to be a new company formed by Nathan Pearson, possibly with his father's involvement. Its stated purpose seems to be data analytics services using insights derived from client data. Amanda and Daniel exchanged glances. You understand this could represent a significant breach of both HIPAA and contractual obligations, Amanda said. I do. That's why I felt obligated to cooperate with your investigation. Daniel leaned forward. Mr. Anderson, we need to ask a direct question. Have you personally accessed Westridge systems since your departure? Here it was, the question I'd been anticipating. I took a deep breath. I maintain emergency disaster recovery credentials as part of standard security protocols I implemented. After hearing concerns from current employees about potential data misuse, I verified certain security logs to determine if client data was at risk. I did not alter any systems or extract any data myself. My actions were consistent with my professional obligation to report potential regulatory violations. I expected immediate criticism or warnings about unauthorized access. Instead, Amanda nodded thoughtfully. Did you document your actions and findings during these verification checks? Yes, meticulously, I said, somewhat relieved by her response. I created logs of every access, captured screenshots of relevant security events, and maintained a detailed timeline. My sole purpose was to verify whether protected information was being mishandled. We would need to review that. Documentation, Daniel said. I retrieved my laptop and opened the encrypted folder containing my complete records. Access logs, screenshots, the Pearson Analytics strategy document, and the massive data transfer records. As they reviewed the materials, their expressions grew increasingly grave. This is extensive, Amanda finally said. The scale of these transfers and the deliberate disabling of security controls suggest a systematic effort to extract protected information. Daniel was studying the Pearson Analytics strategy document. This explicitly acknowledges contractual prohibitions against data use while outlining plans to circumvent them through technical means. That demonstrates clear intent. I should note, I added, that Westridge began purging logs and dismantling the analytics environment yesterday, shortly after your investigators arrived at their offices. However, our disaster recovery systems maintain secure backups of all Security logs as protection against ransomware or malicious deletion. Those backups should still contain all the evidence, even if the original logs have been destroyed. Amanda closed her notebook. Mr. Anderson, based on what you've shown us, we'll need to escalate this investigation immediately. The potential exposure of protected health information at this scale represents a significant compliance issue. What happens next? I asked. We'll be seeking a court order to preserve all Westridge systems and data immediately, Daniel explained. Given the evidence of attempted evidence destruction, we need to move quickly. We'll also need a formal statement from you about everything you've shared today. I'm prepared to provide that, I said. My concern has always been protecting client data and ensuring regulatory compliance. After providing my formal statement, the investigators left with copies of all my documentation. As the door closed behind them, I felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. The situation was now firmly in the hands of federal authorities, beyond my control or influence. I had done what I could to protect the systems and data I'd spent 2 decades securing. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Chaos here, federal agents in Gregory's office. IT team told to lock down all systems. Nathan nowhere to be found. This was moving even faster than I'd anticipated. The federal response suggested they'd found the situation serious enough to take immediate action rather than conducting a prolonged investigation. Another message arrived, this one from James. They're asking about deleted logs and hidden access. Methods, some suits from legal trying to claim routine maintenance, nobody buying it. And then a third message from Diane. Nathan's team cleaning out desks, security escorting them from building, board members arriving for emergency meeting. Things were unraveling quickly at Westridge. I considered my next steps carefully. With federal investigators involved and board action apparently underway, my direct involvement was likely unnecessary and possibly unwelcome. The best thing I could do was remain available to the investigators while staying clear of the corporate fallout. I spent the afternoon organizing my records and preparing for potential follow-up questions from the investigation. Around 4 p.m., my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Michael Anderson speaking. Mr. Anderson, this is Edward Blake, Interim General Counsel for Westridge Technologies. His voice was tense, professional. I understand you've been speaking with HHS investigators today. That's correct, I confirmed, immediately on guard. They contacted me regarding potential HIPAA violations. I see. The board has called an emergency meeting to address these allegations. As the former security director with the most knowledge of our systems, your input would be valuable. Would you be willing to join this meeting remotely? This was unexpected. When is this meeting? It's ongoing now. We can send a secure link immediately. I hesitated, considering the implications. This could be an attempt to gauge what I knew to build a case against me for post-employment system access, or a genuine effort to understand the situation. But if Westridge was truly trying to address the problem, my expertise could help minimize damage to clients and the company. I'll participate with the understanding that I'm not rejoining Westridge in any capacity. I'm simply providing factual information about the security architecture I designed. Understood, Blake replied. We'll send the link shortly. 10 minutes later, I was connected to a video conference with Westridge's boardroom. 14 people were visible. The full board, several executives I recognized, and a few unfamiliar faces likely representing legal counsel. Gregory was conspicuously absent, as was Nathan. Olivia Thompson was leading the meeting, her expression grave. Thank you for joining us, Michael. As you may have gathered, we're dealing with a serious situation regarding potential misuse of client data. I understand federal investigators are involved. I replied neutrally. Yes, HHS officials arrived this morning with concerns about patient data handling. During their preliminary investigation, they discovered evidence suggesting systematic extraction of protected health information for unauthorized purposes. She paused. They've indicated you provided information that contributed to their investigation. I chose my words carefully. I was contacted by HHS investigators who had received anonymous information about potential HIPAA violations. I cooperated fully, providing factual information about our security architecture and compliance requirements. William Martins, another board member, leaned forward. Mr. Anderson, did you access Westridge Systems after your employment terminated? Blake, the interim counsel, interjected quickly. The board should be aware that Mr. Anderson is not obligated to answer questions that might be self-incriminating. His participation today is voluntary and intended to help us understand our systems. I appreciated the lawyer's professionalism, but decided transparency was the best approach. Yes, I did access systems using emergency disaster recovery credentials that were part of our standard security protocols. I did so after receiving concerning information from current employees about potential data misuse. My actions were limited to verifying security logs to determine if protected information was at risk, which is consistent with professional security practice when breaches are suspected. The board members exchanged glances, but no one immediately objected. Olivia continued, what we're trying to understand is the extent of the potential exposure. Federal investigators have seized servers and locked down our systems, which has disrupted operations. They've indicated that patient data from multiple healthcare clients was being extracted to an external environment associated with a company called Pearson Analytics Group. Based on the information I've reviewed, that appears to be accurate, I confirmed. Large volumes of patient records were transferred to a separate environment with minimal security controls, and from there to external storage locations registered to Pearson Analytics Group. And you're confident these transfers were unauthorized? Asked another board member. Yes, they violated multiple security policies, bypassed required controls, and contradicted explicit contractual terms with our healthcare clients. Normal security alerts were deliberately disabled to prevent detection. Blake looked grim. The potential liability here is substantial. Beyond regulatory penalties, we could face client litigation, breach notification requirements, and significant reputational damage. Where are Gregory and Nathan now? I asked, noting their absence. Olivia's expression tightened. Nathan hasn't been located. Gregory is meeting with personal counsel. We've placed both on administrative leave pending investigation. This explained the emergency board meeting without the CEO present, a rare occurrence in corporate governance. What we need from you, Michael, Olivia continued, is guidance on two fronts. First, understanding exactly what systems were compromised and what data may have been exposed. Second, recommendations for immediate mitigation steps to protect client information and restore compliance. For the next hour, I walked the board through what I knew about the data extraction, the systems affected, and the potential exposure. I explained how the disaster recovery backups could help reconstruct what had happened even if original logs had been deleted, and outlined immediate steps needed to secure systems and notify affected parties. Throughout, the board's questions focused on remediation rather than blame, how to contain the damage, meet regulatory requirements, and rebuild client trust. It was clear they understood the severity of the situation and were taking appropriate action. As the meeting concluded, Olivia addressed me directly. Michael, your insights have been invaluable. The board deeply regrets the circumstances of your departure and the events that followed. We'll need your continued cooperation with investigators, but we also want to discuss appropriate recognition of your role in identifying this situation once the immediate crisis is managed. My concern has always been protecting client data and the systems I built, I replied. I'm willing to help stabilize the situation, but I have no interest in returning to Westridge permanently. Understood, she said. We'll be in touch as things develop. After disconnecting, I sat back in my chair, processing what had just occurred. The board seemed genuinely committed to addressing the problem rather than covering it up, a positive sign for the company's future. But the scale of the breach and the deliberate nature of the violations suggested difficult times ahead for Westridge. My phone buzzed with a new message from Sarah. Board announced Gregory and Nathan suspended pending investigation. Olivia. Thompson named interim CEO, original security team, being reinstated to help with remediation. They're asking if you'll consult. I smiled slightly at how quickly news traveled within the company. Tell them I'll help with immediate stabilization efforts, but only as an external consultant, I replied. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, a breaking news alert appeared on my phone. Tech executive detained at airport following data. Breach investigation. The brief article reported that Nathan Pearson had been prevented from boarding a flight to the Cayman Islands and was being questioned by federal authorities in connection with an ongoing investigation into data privacy violations. This confirmed what I had suspected. Nathan had planned to exit quickly once the investigation began, possibly to access funds or data stored beyond U.S. jurisdiction. His detention meant federal authorities viewed the situation seriously enough to take immediate action rather than simply issuing subpoenas or document requests. The next morning brought a formal email from Westridge's board offering a consulting arrangement to help navigate the immediate crisis. The terms were generous, a substantial daily rate, clear scope limited to remediation efforts, and explicit indemnification for my past actions in identifying the breach. They weren't asking me to return just to help clean up the mess before moving on. I accepted the arrangement with specific conditions. I would work remotely, report directly to the board rather than any executive, and maintain independence to provide honest assessments without corporate filtering. To my surprise, they agreed to everything without negotiation. For the next 2 weeks, I worked alongside federal investigators, external auditors, and Westridge's security team to piece together exactly what had happened and how to remedy it. The full picture was even more troubling than I had initially suspected. Nathan and Gregory had been planning the data extraction operation for months before my departure. They had incorporated Pearson Analytics Group as a separate entity, secured office space in a downtown high-rise, and even begun marketing their services to pharmaceutical companies and healthcare marketers, all while still extracting the data needed to fulfill those promises. The security logs revealed systematic efforts to circumvent controls, disable alerts, and conceal their activities. They had used Gregory's credentials to authorize changes that would normally require multiple approvals, modified system configurations, to allow bulk data transfers, and deliberately fragmented the extraction process to avoid triggering volume-based alerts. Most concerning was evidence that some client data had already been packaged into de-identified analytics products and presented to potential customers in preliminary demonstrations. While they hadn't yet sold the products, they had come dangerously close to monetizing misappropriated data. Throughout the investigation, I maintained professional distance from the corporate politics unfolding at Westridge. My focus remained on the technical aspects, identifying compromised systems, verifying data security, and implementing enhanced monitoring. The board respected this boundary, keeping me informed of major developments but not drawing me into their internal deliberations. By the end of the second week, We had established a comprehensive picture of the breach and implemented immediate safeguards. All extracted data had been located and secured, including copies on external cloud storage. Enhanced monitoring was in place to detect any similar attempts in the future, and a preliminary notification plan had been developed for affected clients and regulatory authorities. As my consulting engagement concluded, Olivia requested a final video meeting. "The board wants to express our sincere appreciation for your assistance during this crisis," she began. "Your expertise has been invaluable in understanding what happened and how to address it." "I'm glad I could help," I replied simply. "I should update you on several developments," she continued. "Gregory has resigned effective immediately. Nathan remains suspended and is cooperating with federal authorities. We've initiated a search for a permanent CEO with a strong background in compliance and ethical leadership." I nodded, unsurprised by these outcomes. "The board has also unanimously approved a formal apology and settlement offer regarding your termination," she added. "Our review found that your departure was implemented improperly and without adequate board oversight. We'd like to make this right, including financial compensation and a public acknowledgement of your contributions to Westridge." "I appreciate that," I said, "though my primary concern has always been the systems and data security rather than personal vindication." "We understand. That's why we've also approved a complete security governance overhaul based on your recommendations, including board-level oversight of all data handling practices and enhanced protection for security personnel who raise compliance concerns." This was a more meaningful outcome than any personal settlement, structural changes that would help prevent similar situations in the future. "There's one more thing," Olivia said. "The board would like to offer you a role as a permanent, independent security advisor, not an employee, but a consultant reporting directly to the board's audit committee. You would help oversee the implementation of the new governance framework and provide ongoing guidance on security matters." The offer was unexpected but thoughtfully structured. It recognized my desire to maintain independence while still contributing to the systems I had built. "I'll consider it," I promised, "but I think Westridge also needs to look at internal advancement for the security leadership. Sarah Chen has demonstrated exceptional judgment throughout this situation. She deserves serious consideration for a senior role." Olivia smiled. "We're already discussing that possibility. Your team has proven their value under extraordinary circumstances." As our call concluded, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The crisis had exposed serious flaws in Westridge's governance, but the response suggested a genuine commitment to addressing them rather than simply managing public relations. That evening, I walked along the Seattle waterfront, watching ferries cross Elliott Bay as the sun set behind the Olympic Mountains. 20 years of building security systems had taught me that no technical control could ever fully protect against determined insider threats. The human elements, integrity, ethical judgment, proper governance, were always the most critical components of any security architecture. Nathan and Gregory had failed to understand this fundamental truth. They had seen security as merely technical obstacles to be circumvented rather than embodiments of ethical principles and professional standards. Their technical knowledge had allowed them to bypass controls, but they had underestimated the human elements, the professionals who recognized wrongdoing and were willing to speak up. As darkness fell over the city, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Board approved new security leadership structure today. They've offered me CISO position, reporting directly to the board's audit committee. Said you recommended me. Thank you." I smiled as I typed my reply. "You earned it long before any recommendation from me. Congratulations." Walking back to my apartment, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past month. I had lost a position, but preserved my integrity. I had been pushed out, but ultimately gained wider respect. Most importantly, I had stayed true to the principle that had guided my entire career, that security wasn't just about protecting systems and data, but about protecting the people those systems and data represented. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, whether as Westridge's advisor or in some new role elsewhere. But tonight, I could take satisfaction in knowing that the systems I had built, both technical and human, had ultimately worked exactly as designed. 3 months after the investigation began, I found myself sitting in a federal courthouse in downtown Seattle, waiting to testify in the case against Gregory and Nathan Pearson. The prosecution had built a comprehensive case around unauthorized access to protected health information, wire fraud related to the marketing of stolen data insights, and obstruction of justice for their attempts to destroy evidence once the investigation began. My role was straightforward: explain Westridge's security architecture, the protections that had been deliberately bypassed, and how the disaster recovery systems had preserved evidence despite deletion attempts. I wasn't there to offer opinions on guilt or innocence, just technical facts about systems I had built and maintained. As I waited outside the courtroom, Sarah arrived, dressed in a conservative business suit that reflected her new role as Westridge's Chief Information Security Officer. "Nervous?" she asked, taking a seat beside me. "Not really," I replied. "I'm just explaining technical systems, something I've done for 20 years. You're the one managing the aftermath day to day. How's that going?" She sighed. "Challenging but rewarding. We've completely overhauled the security governance structure based on your recommendations. Every data access now requires multi-level authorization and generates immutable audit logs. The board's audit committee reviews security reports weekly." She smiled slightly. "And they actually read them now. Client relationships? Better than expected, honestly. Once they understood we had identified the breach ourselves and prevented actual data monetization, most were willing to work with us on remediation rather than immediately terminating contracts. The healthcare clients have required enhanced monitoring and third-party audits, but only 2 smaller clients have left entirely. This was a better outcome than I had anticipated. In my experience, data breaches often led to mass client exodus, especially in heavily regulated industries like healthcare. "The board deserves credit for their transparency," Sarah continued. "Olivia insisted on full disclosure to clients rather than minimizing the situation. That approach has actually rebuilt trust faster than trying to downplay what happened." Before I could respond, a court officer appeared. "Mr. Anderson, they're ready for you." The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with about 30 people present: legal teams, journalists, court staff, and a few observers. Gregory and Nathan sat at the defense table, both in conservative suits, their expressions carefully neutral. Gregory looked older than I remembered, the stress of the past months visible in new lines around his eyes. Nathan appeared subdued, his former confidence notably absent. After being sworn in, I took my seat in the witness box. The federal prosecutor, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s, approached. "Mr. Anderson, please state your former position at Westridge Technologies." "I was the IT systems director for 20 years, responsible for all information security architecture and compliance systems." "And you designed the security systems that protected client data, including healthcare information subject to HIPAA regulations?" "Yes, along with my team." For the next hour, I explained in straightforward terms how our security systems worked, the multiple layers of protection for sensitive data, and the specific controls that had been disabled to allow the unauthorized data extraction. I walked through the disaster recovery mechanisms that had preserved evidence despite deletion attempts and the specific client contracts that prohibited secondary use of their data. Throughout my testimony, I maintained professional detachment, focusing on technical facts rather than personal animosity toward Gregory and Nathan. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability for actions that had jeopardized sensitive, personal information and violated trust. The defense attorney tried to suggest that my continued access to Westridge systems after my employment ended constituted unauthorized access, similar to what the defendants were accused of. I addressed this directly. The disaster recovery credentials were part of standard security protocols designed for emergency scenarios. When I received credible information about potential data breaches from current employees, I verified system logs to determine if protected information was at risk, a standard practice in security incident response. I did not modify systems, extract data, or pursue any personal gain. I documented every access and provided complete records to investigators. But you were no longer employed by Westridge at that time, the attorney pressed. As the architect of these security systems, I maintained professional obligation to report potential regulatory violations affecting sensitive data. The board has since acknowledged that my actions were consistent with security best practices and helped prevent more extensive exposure. The attorney moved on, unable to establish equivalence between my focused verification of potential breaches and the defendant's systematic extraction of protected data for commercial purposes. After my testimony concluded, I was free to leave, but chose to remain in the courtroom, watching as technical experts from HHS and the FBI provided further evidence about the data transfers, external storage locations, and marketing materials created for Pearson Analytics Group. The most damning testimony came from a former colleague of Nathan's who had been granted immunity in exchange for cooperation. He described in detail how Nathan had planned the data extraction for months before even joining Westridge, having identified the company as an ideal target due to its rich healthcare and financial services data repositories. Gregory had been brought in as CEO specifically to facilitate this plan, leveraging his authority to replace the existing security leadership, me, and install Nathan in a position to access protected data. By the end of the day, the case against them appeared overwhelming. As court adjourned, I noticed Olivia Thompson sitting in the back row. She acknowledged me with a small nod as I exited. Outside the courthouse, away from the small group of reporters covering the case, she approached me. "Thank you for your testimony today," she said, clear and focused on the facts, which is exactly what was needed. "I'm not interested in revenge," I replied, "just accountability and ensuring it doesn't happen again." "The board feels the same way." She glanced back at the courthouse. "This has been a difficult lesson, but one we needed. We became too focused on growth and innovation without sufficient oversight of how that was being achieved." "How's the CEO search progressing?" I asked, changing the subject. "We've narrowed it to 3 finalists, all with strong backgrounds in ethical leadership and regulatory compliance. The board is unanimous that technical expertise needs to be balanced with integrity." She paused. "Our offer for you to serve as a permanent security advisor still stands, by the way. I had been considering this offer for months now. I've decided to accept, but with modified terms. I'd like to focus specifically on designing governance frameworks and compliance architectures rather than day-to-day security operations." "Sarah has that well in hand," Olivia smiled. "We'd be delighted to have your expertise in that capacity. The governance aspects are where we clearly fell short." As we parted ways, I felt a sense of closure beginning to form. The technical and legal aspects of the breach were being addressed appropriately. My role was evolving into something that leveraged my experience while allowing me to maintain professional independence. The next morning, I met with Marcus from HR at a coffee shop near his home. He had reached out, wanting to speak privately away from Westridge offices. "I should have done more," he said, after we'd settled at a corner table, "when they accelerated. Your departure, when they rushed through Nathan's security clearances, I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't push hard enough." "You did what you could," I assured him. "You refused to let them use that irregular offboarding form, and you gave me that warning call. Not everyone would have done even that much." He shook his head. "It wasn't enough, but I'm trying to make up for it now. We're implementing new whistleblower protections for employees who report potential violations and establishing clearer boundaries between the board and executive authority. No CEO will be able to make unilateral personnel changes to compliance-critical positions again." This was a positive development, systemic changes rather than just addressing specific incidents. "How are the remaining team members doing?" I asked. "Adjusting to the new reality. There's been a lot of change. Some of Nathan's people have left, which was expected. Your original team has mostly stayed, with several receiving promotions as... We've expanded the security department." He hesitated. "We've also established a compliance recognition program named after you, the Anderson Award for Integrity in Action. The board approved it unanimously." I was genuinely surprised by this. "That's unexpected." "You turned down the public acknowledgement they wanted to make, so they found another way to recognize your contribution." His expression turned serious. "What you did, Michael, standing up for proper security despite personal risk, that's the standard we want to encourage. While I was uncomfortable with the personal recognition, I understood the value of establishing clear examples of ethical behavior for the organization." After meeting with Marcus, I drove to the Federal Building for a follow-up interview with Amanda Martinez from HHS. The agency was conducting a comprehensive review of Westridge's compliance remediation efforts, and my input was part of their assessment. "Based on your expertise, are the enhanced controls now in place sufficient to prevent similar incidents?" she asked, after reviewing the changes Westridge had implemented. "The technical controls are robust," I confirmed. "Multiple authentication, layers, enhanced monitoring, immutable audit logs, but more importantly, the governance structure has been completely revamped. Security leaders now report directly to the board's audit committee, bypassing executive management for compliance matters. That's the critical change. Because the previous breach was an insider threat at the executive level," she noted. "Exactly. No technical control can fully protect against leaders determined to misuse their authority. You need governance structures that provide appropriate checks and balances." She made a note in her file. "One thing I've been curious about. You mentioned emergency credentials that allowed you to verify security concerns after your departure. Was that a standard practice you implemented throughout the organization?" "No," I admitted. "It was a specific precaution for disaster recovery scenarios, known only to me and documented in emergency procedures. Under normal circumstances, those credentials would have been transferred during a proper transition. The rushed nature of my departure meant they were overlooked. A fortunate oversight, as it turned out. I would characterize it as a properly functioning security control rather than an oversight. Emergency access routes should remain viable during leadership transitions, precisely to prevent the scenario that unfolded." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "Fair point. From a compliance perspective, though, I would recommend formalizing such controls, with appropriate oversight rather than relying on individual discretion." I agree completely. In fact, that's one of the recommendations I've made to Westridge, establishing a secure emergency access framework with multi-party oversight. No single individual, including the CEO, should have unilateral control over security bypasses. As our meeting concluded, Amanda shared that the agency was generally satisfied with Westridge's remediation efforts. The company has been notably cooperative throughout our investigation, transparent about what happened, and proactive in implementing solutions. That's unfortunately rare in these situations. Credit goes to the board, particularly Olivia Thompson, I noted. Her background in compliance gave her the perspective to recognize the seriousness of the situation immediately. Leaving the federal building, I checked my phone to find several messages from my attorney. The case against Gregory and Nathan had taken an unexpected turn. Gregory had agreed to a plea deal in exchange for testimony against his son and several external collaborators who had been involved in marketing the stolen data insights. The prosecution had apparently uncovered evidence that the scheme extended beyond just the two of them, involving investors who had backed their previous ventures. This development was likely to expedite the legal proceedings, which was positive for everyone involved. Westridge could focus on rebuilding rather than being dragged through a prolonged court battle, and the broader industry would receive a clear message about the consequences of mishandling protected information. That evening, I met Diane for dinner at a small restaurant near her apartment. Unlike Sarah, who had advanced within Westridge, Diane had chosen to leave, accepting a position as head of security for a regional hospital network. No hard feelings, she assured me when I asked about her departure. Westridge handled the aftermath well, and Sarah's doing a great job. I just wanted a fresh start somewhere. My expertise in healthcare security could be directly applied. Completely understandable, I said. How's the new role? Challenging in different ways. I'm on the provider side now, responsible for patient data at the source rather than in a software environment. The stakes feel even higher, but I have more direct control. She smiled, and I'm implementing a lot of what I learned from you over the years. As we discussed her new position and the security challenges unique to hospital environments, I realized how much I had missed these professional conversations. Exploring complex problems with skilled colleagues, sharing insights and approaches. It had been the most rewarding aspect of my role at Westridge, beyond the technical work itself. Have you thought about what you want to do long-term? Diane asked. Beyond the advisory role with Westridge, it was a question I'd been considering for months. I'm exploring options in security governance consulting, helping organizations design proper oversight structures for sensitive data. Most companies focus heavily on technical controls, but underinvest in the human and organizational aspects of security. You'd be excellent at that, she affirmed. The Westridge situation proved how critical those governance elements are. I'm also considering some teaching opportunities. Seattle Central College has reached out about developing a cybersecurity ethics curriculum for their IT program. Professor Anderson, Diane said with a grin. It has a nice ring to it. As our dinner concluded, Diane mentioned something that caught me by surprise. Did you know there's a case study being written about the Westridge incident for business schools? One of the investigators mentioned it to me. They're highlighting it as an example of proper crisis response after a major compliance failure. That's, unexpected, I admitted, but fitting. Most business school cases focus on financial mismanagement or strategic failures. This puts data ethics and security governance on the curriculum alongside those topics. She was right. Whatever personal discomfort I felt about being part of a case study was outweighed by the educational value. Future business leaders needed to understand that data protection wasn't just a technical issue, but a fundamental governance responsibility. The following week brought two significant developments. First, Nathan Pearson agreed to a plea deal, admitting to unauthorized access of protected health information and wire fraud. In exchange for reduced sentencing recommendations, he provided detailed information about the technical methods used to bypass security controls, information that would help other organizations protect against similar attacks. Second, Westridge announced their new CEO, Dr. Eleanor Chen, a former healthcare executive with both technical expertise and a strong background in compliance and ethics. Her appointment signaled the board's commitment to rebuilding the company, with integrity at its core, rather than merely technical innovation. I was invited to meet with Dr. Chen during her first week. She was refreshingly direct, acknowledging the company's recent failures while focusing primarily on the path forward. "I've reviewed your security architecture recommendations in detail," she said after brief introductions. "The technical elements are impressive, but I'm particularly interested in your governance framework. The separation of compliance reporting from executive authority is something I implemented in my previous organization after a much smaller incident." "It's the most critical component," I agreed. "Technical controls can always be bypassed by those with sufficient authority and knowledge. Proper governance creates the necessary checks and balances." We spent 2 hours discussing specific implementations of security governance, the balance between innovation and protection, and how to create a culture where compliance was valued rather than seen as an obstacle. Throughout, Dr. Chen demonstrated both technical understanding and ethical clarity, exactly what Westridge needed in this rebuilding phase. "I understand you've declined rejoining Westridge in an operational capacity," she noted as our meeting concluded. "But your advisory role will be invaluable during this transition. The board speaks very highly of your judgment." "I'm committed to helping rebuild the security foundation," I assured her. "But day-to-day operations are in excellent hands with Sarah and the team." As fall approached, life settled into a new rhythm. 3 days a week, I consulted with Westridge on their security governance implementation, working primarily with the board's audit committee rather than operational teams. 2 days a week, I developed curriculum for Seattle Central College's new cybersecurity ethics program, which would launch in the spring semester. I had also begun meeting with other technology companies in the region, offering guidance on security governance best practices. The Westridge incident, though not publicly connected to me, had created interest in better protection against insider threats at the executive level. One unusually sunny October afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Tom, one of the senior engineers from my former team, who had remained largely silent during the crisis, concerned about his family's financial security. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," he said somewhat awkwardly when I opened the door. "Sarah mentioned you were still in the same place." "Not at all," I assured him, inviting him in. "How are things at Westridge?" "Different, better in most ways." He settled on my couch, still seeming uncomfortable. "I wanted to apologize for not doing more when everything was happening. I saw the signs, the unusual data transfers, the disabled security controls, but I didn't speak up like Sarah and the others." "You had a family to consider," I said. "That's a perfectly reasonable priority." He shook his head. "I've struggled with it for months. Professional ethics versus personal security." He met my gaze directly. "I wanted you to know that I've learned from watching how you handled everything. No dramatic confrontations or public accusations, just methodical documentation and working through proper channels." "That was always my approach," I acknowledged. "Flashy whistleblowing makes headlines, but careful documentation often achieves better outcomes." "Well, it made a difference, not just at Westridge, but for me personally." He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a folder. "I'm teaching a module in the new compliance training program. Thought you might want to see the materials." The folder contained a comprehensive training guide focused on recognizing and reporting potential data misuse, specifically structured for technical professionals who might observe suspicious system activities. It was thorough, practical, and emphasized protection for those who reported concerns through proper channels. "This is excellent work, Tom." He smiled for the first time since arriving. "It's part of the new compliance culture Dr. Chen is building. Every technical professional goes through this training, from junior developers to senior architects. No exceptions." This was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of the entire ordeal. Not just technical fixes or governance reforms, but cultural change that empowered professionals throughout the organization to recognize and address potential issues. After Tom left, I walked to a small park overlooking Lake Washington, taking advantage of the rare autumn sunshine. 25 years in technology had taught me that systems always reflected the values of those who built and governed them. The most sophisticated security architecture could be undermined by leaders who viewed protection as an obstacle rather than a responsibility. The Westridge incident had been painful for everyone involved, particularly the dedicated professionals, who had found themselves caught between conflicting loyalties. But from that pain had emerged stronger systems, better governance, and a renewed commitment to the fundamental purpose of security controls, protecting the real people represented by the data in our care. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Chess just closed their investigation. Clean bill of health for our remediated systems. Celebration dinner with the team tomorrow?" I smiled as I replied, "Wouldn't miss it." The sun was beginning to set over the Olympic Mountains as I walked home, casting long shadows across the water. In technology, shadows had always been my domain, the overlooked corners where security thrived or failed, the quiet persistence of proper controls versus the flashy promises of innovation without responsibility. Nathan and Gregory had failed to understand that fundamental reality of security work. They had seen only obstacles to circumvent, not principles to uphold. Their technical knowledge had allowed them to bypass controls temporarily, but they had underestimated the human element, the professionals who recognized when something was wrong, and the governance structures that ultimately brought accountability. As I reached my apartment building, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Seattle Central College had approved the cybersecurity ethics curriculum I'd developed. Classes would begin in January. I would be teaching the next generation of security professionals, not just technical skills, but the ethical framework needed to apply them responsibly. It wasn't the career path I had envisioned when I joined Westridge 2 decades ago. But as I looked back over the events of the past 6 months, I realized it was exactly where I needed to be, helping develop both the systems and the people who would protect sensitive information in an increasingly complex digital landscape. Security wasn't just about encryption algorithms or access controls. It was about people making ethical choices, governance structures providing proper oversight, and professionals having the courage to stand up when something wasn't right. That had always been my approach throughout my career, even when it came at personal cost. As I settled in for the evening, I opened my laptop to review the class materials I'd prepared for my first course. Ethics in Cybersecurity, Balancing, Innovation and Protection. The syllabus included a case study based on a thinly disguised version of the Westridge incident, focusing on the governance failures that had enabled the breach and the methodical response that had uncovered it. The first lecture topic was one I had added only recently: the human element, why security depends more on people than technology. It seemed the most fitting place to begin, with the truth I had learned over decades of building systems designed to protect both data and the people it represented. Technical skills had value, certainly, but integrity, Judgment and courage were the true foundations of security, qualities that no algorithm could replace and no malicious actor could circumvent. Teaching that to the next generation of security professionals would be my most meaningful contribution yet. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.